Thanks, Toran, for coming to this session. We will be talking about making Tekton Pipeline engine a first-class citizen in Jenkins, basically on par with freestyle jobs, pipeline, and other components. I wanted to have some discussion to share my vision, unfortunately not very documented by now, and to discuss what is missing and yet to see how we could collaborate together with the Tekton community on this topic. So, do you see my screen?
Probably not yet. No.
Because I should have clicked there. Okay, and now?
Yep. Yes. Yes.
Okay, so what do we have? So something like 1 year ago, a bit more, we have Babada from Red Hat. He started integrating Tekton with Jenkins. There is a Tekton Client Plugin. It was also a part of work for OpenShift, Jenkins Pipeline. So there. So what Tekton Client Plugin does? Well, it basically provides some interface for communicating with Tekton pipelines, so you can create resources, trigger builds, and retrieve some results. But basically, that's it. And how it's implemented, it's actually a pipeline step. So it's not like integrating Tekton execution inside Jenkins. It's just triggering some operations on Tekton side and again, just retrieving the results, while the rest of the syntax remains in Jenkins, and also the execution remains in Jenkins. What are the obstacles here? So firstly, you are expected to have all the context on the Jenkins side, then you do not get all benefits from Tekton's pipeline engines, because there is no integrated user experience. So you can trigger Tekton, collect results, but for example, if Tekton produces build artifacts, reports, you couldn't stream them back to Jenkins. Also, you rely on the entire pipeline engine ecosystem, because if you have a script like that, then you have Groovy Sandbox, and then you have pipeline CPS, which basically implements the execution engine inside Jenkins. And all of that leads to quite a lot of complexity. Also maintenance overheads for the community. What I was thinking about, that it would be nice if we had basically Tekton as native engine in Jenkins. So when you use Jenkins, for example, we can go to CI Jenkins.io. If you have a pipeline, it might be Jenkins itself. It consists of multiple components. So we have this web UI. We also have what I call orchestrator part. So basically here, for example, there is a webhook receiver which triggers builds and propagates results back to the ACM. So all of that is handled by Jenkins. All of that can be handled by Pro, for example, in the Kubernetes ecosystem. But yeah, this way Jenkins is quite strong, especially thanks to all its reporting compatibilities. But there is also pipeline engine. So basically, the thing where we actually do the execution, and I wonder whether we could make it pluggable. So, for example, here instead of executing Jenkins pipeline, we could have Tekton running somewhere, and we could still get all the results. So we have Jenkins interface for triggering, for just all processing, and more importantly for report publishing. But the engine under the hood can be changed. And of course, when you use Tekton, it means that you do not need to store much execution context on the controller side. And at the same time, you don't have to manage agents, etc., because Tekton ecosystem does it for you. So it means that it would be much more simpler from the Jenkins side, but we could get all advantages of Jenkins, because yeah, currently Tekton doesn't have its own browsing UI. There are some implementations for Tekton, but I believe it's not a part of the main project, right?
We do have a dashboard. It's part of Tekton, but it's kind of like the Kubernetes dashboard. So it allows you to see resources. It's not specifically. I think the Jenkins UI is more targeted towards maybe CI/CD scenarios where you see the pipelines and you have you can see the history of execution as well. While the execution history for Tekton relies on what is on the cluster, basically right now. I mean, it will evolve over time, but the fact is that a lot of people as well is used and enjoys the Jenkins UI, and I think for people used to work with the Jenkins UI, it would be beneficial to be able to continue using that UI, but rely on some of the benefits of having Tekton running underneath.
Right, and there are multiple ways to make it compatible. So we already have many bits. So for example, this Tekton client basically is based on Java library, which provides the Tekton interactions. It's still missing a few critical bits, for example, visualization for execution. There are some bits for that, but still it could be much better, just even for pipeline logs. If we talk about something else, then there are open questions: how we integrate with OpenTelemetry, how we stream logs, and we already have a lot of services which we could use, so that we don't have to implement everything from scratch. And more importantly, we have things like Jenkinsfile Runner, which can actually execute particular steps. So one of issues with Tekton has a huge ecosystem of various tasks that are reusable on its own. But of course, it doesn't have report publishing. But what we could do, we could take Jenkinsfile Runner and run it as a publishing step, which streams the data back to Jenkins. So basically how it would look like that, we have Jenkins as a big orchestrator. It can either execute pipeline. I should have bought a whimsical license. It can execute pipeline, or it can execute Tekton. Well, actually not execute, but trigger, because Tekton lives on its own in the Kubernetes cluster. But what could happen next? Some of the Tekton steps could trigger Jenkinsfile Runner, for example, for publishing. And it could stream the data back to Jenkins. So what it means is that we would keep all this orchestrator part. For example, JFR could provide reporting capability, and Tekton execution could stream all the build results and metadata again to Jenkins. So we could even rebuild the pipeline graph so that we could display pipeline execution graph even if it gets produced by Tekton with all parallel steps, etc. It's already supported in API. So we could actually get this running relatively in a simple way. The biggest problem would be to just adjust Jenkins so that this bridge is more or less transparent, because right now there is no solutions which would implement these three arrows. So it would require changes on the Jenkins core side, on APIs, so that we can actually make it possible. So question to you, does it really make sense to have something like that?
I think it would be interesting to maybe highlight some use cases for these, or like what would be the benefit, what would people looking for when using this kind of combination, right? It's not entirely clear to me whether in this setup people would be writing pipelines using the Jenkins pipeline format or the Tekton format?
I would rather expect Tekton format in this case, at least in the beginning. There could be some interoperability and conversion in the future. But yeah, Tekton is the most straightforward because you have pipeline definition and just trigger it on Tekton. So what are the benefits? Firstly, Jenkins itself, Jenkins is not a cloud native engine because even if you can offload a lot of execution to agents, which could be used in a cloud native way, the most of the context and the most of execution is stored on the controller side. And features like failover and script security actually requires to pay huge cost. So if you take the Jenkins controller on its own, it's not cloud native. It's not scalable enough when it comes to big pipelines. You can create multiple controllers, you can create clusters of Jenkinses with integration via message bus, but still it has a lot of limitations. But if we offloaded execution to Tekton, so firstly, we would get benefits of Tekton with all its scalability features available, with opportunity to just spawn as many Tekton pipelines as needed on different Kubernetes clusters, again, if needed. And Jenkins itself could stay to some extent aside and just provide publishing front end. And again, Jenkins itself can be eventually converted in this way, so that let's say there are multiple web UI providers connected to the cluster somehow. And yeah, we have prototypes for that. For example, Project Nirvana I was working on. But yeah, for that, the critical part is pipeline engine, because while pipeline engine is integrated with the controller part, it's really difficult to do anything.
Right. Yeah, and as you mentioned, like high availability, I think scalability and so forth. I think one of the pain points for Jenkins in enterprise that I've heard at least is high availability. So if you like want to reconfigure your Jenkins, you need to reload it and you have a downtime of a few minutes. So I think in this approach, you would not have the downtime for running the pipelines. But what happens so if you restart Jenkins, would that still be a single point of failure in terms of HA? I guess it depends how the pipelines are triggered. And that's what I wanted to envision. So if Jenkins is still the one triggering the pipeline, if you're restarting Jenkins and receiving the webhook and so forth, then if you have Jenkins, an upgrade to Jenkins, it still means that for that window, you cannot start new pipelines, right?
In classic architecture, yes. But classic architecture is just one of configuration for Jenkins. And actually, what blocks us right now is the fact that we have a lot of context in runtime. So some data can be uploaded to pluggable storage. There are implementations. There are also event systems. So for example, for Blue Ocean Web UI, for various logging systems, we can stream events across multiple instances. So technically, we have everything we need to start splitting controllers once we could remove the pipeline engine. There is, of course, many edge cases where it wouldn't be possible because Jenkins is also a webhook receiver, which is still single point of failure, whatever you do. But once pipeline execution happens separately, we can actually do a lot of architecture changes to the controller itself. So basically converting Jenkins controller to controller plane, and also have a kind of web UI, which again can be scalable and well, basically can be a fully client-side API event as well if needed. So even Blue Ocean, it's basically just a bunch of JavaScript, which talks to REST API, which can be served from multiple instances if needed, and the connection to event bus, which is again can be distributed. So for me, not having a pipeline on the controller would be one of enablers for that. Yeah, I see Carlos on the call. So we actually did quite a lot of experiments in the past. So it's technically possible. Yes, it would require a lot of changes in Jenkins. But if you experiment with Tekton, it would be one of possibilities. It can be done with Jenkins Pipeline as well without Tekton. So for example, Jenkinsfile Runner is basically the same, offloading the pipeline engine to a separate instance like container, streaming results back. But Tekton has its own advantages because we hope that Tekton will become a commodity at some point. So why don't we integrate Jenkins with Tekton as well?
Yes, yes, indeed. So basically, you're saying if you remove the pipeline execution engine from the core, then you still have some runtime context in the core Jenkins, but you can offload that somewhere else. And then basically.
Yeah, so if we talk about real high availability, of course, we will need to externalize the context. And it has been a common understanding in Jenkins for more than 5 years. If you want to change the architecture, if you want to get rid of controller as instance, we will need to significantly rework. But yeah, currently pipeline is one of the impediments because well, you either have multiple controllers in some way, or you create completely different architecture. So Tekton is basically one step towards this completely different architecture. And it can be also potentially reused in other projects. So yeah, there are many Tekton users by now. So for me, it would be natural that if we at least tried using this engine and provide the possibility for end users to choose whether they use Jenkins Pipeline or Tekton, because current state for Jenkins Pipeline is, yeah, it's a kind of a liability for us. It requires a lot of maintenance. And yeah, if we talk about, let's say, 5 to 10 years horizon, I would rather question whether we should keep maintaining Jenkins Pipeline as main engine for such long term.
Well, there are a lot of users of the Jenkins pipeline.
Yeah, right.
I think.
But you can use Jenkins Pipeline, but what the engine is under the hood is a separate topic. Because Jenkins Pipeline, again, they firstly expect the user experience. And of course, Groovy DSL, they're perfect, but many of the speeds can be mapped to Tekton execution. So there was already a prototype Jose was presenting at the DevOps World that basically you offload pipeline execution to Jenkinsfile Runner and then return the results back. Jenkinsfile Runner can run in Tekton. For example, SAP, they created Steward CI, and it's basically Tekton plus Jenkinsfile Runner plus visualization capabilities. So it could be done like that. But yeah, maybe having Tekton as an intermediate layer is better than creating orchestration just for Jenkinsfile Runner, because if we do it in a more generic way, at some point we will be able to switch, or at least to offer users an opportunity. I'm pretty sure that in 5 to 10 years you will still have Jenkins Pipeline, but yeah, for me it's not like saying that Tekton will be the only solution in Jenkins. For me, it's rather making it as an alternative for those who want to get just Tekton execution, but get benefits of Jenkins like publishing. So where Jenkins is really strong. Jenkins is not strong in terms of managing cloud native pipelines in Kubernetes, just because it has completely different architecture. Tekton is much better for that. And while we could re-implement significant parts, I would rather see how we could integrate.
Sure, makes sense. Yeah.
So for that, yeah, I wanted to really talk to Tekton community to see what would be missing and what would be use cases on your side. Because for us, one of the questions is not like Jenkins and Tekton, but other ecosystem parts which could be reused. So for example, log streaming. Because if Tekton community plans to adopt standard log streaming solution, for example, open telemetry, who knows, in the future, then for us it would be also an opportunity to hook on that instead of inventing something on our own.
Right. Yeah, so logs are all stored in pods now. So when you use the Kubernetes plugin in Jenkins, how do you stream the logs back? Do you have the agent that takes them from the pod and streams them back?
So for that we have a remoting protocol. So basically it's a Jenkins own implementation. Well, currently it can operate via WebSockets or via TCP. There are two connection modes. There is also implementation for Apache Kafka, but generally it's our own communication layer, which does object serialization and a lot of other bits, and it basically would provide the entire RMI layer for Jenkins controller. But yeah, there is one common myth about Jenkins that when you use, let's say, Kubernetes plugin to start Kubernetes agent, that you do execution on this agent. It's correct, but only to some extent, because all the context is stored on the controller side, and the controller just does RMI calls to the agent to retrieve some information. So even with Kubernetes plugin, etc., actually, even if we provision a container, the almost entire execution will happen on the controller.
I see.
Yeah, but remoting is used to stream log information, etc., back to controller. So what we did, remoting itself, it's quite stable solution. But for example, when we were talking about clustering Jenkins, the option we discussed is actually using message bus. And during Google Summer of Code in 2017, we created the implementation for Apache Kafka. So basically what it means is there can be multiple controllers and multiple agents. And the agents could stream the data to controllers, and controllers can visualize them just by subscribing to events. And it's also one step towards high availability, because remoting itself is point-to-point communication. So in remoting, there is no any kind of broadcast capabilities. But when we switched to Apache Kafka, in that particular plugin, we were actually able to avoid that. And for example, that's why I mentioned open telemetry, because if Tekton streams the logs to open telemetry logs, then firstly, it can be used by any visualization tool in Kubernetes. But Jenkins on the same power could just subscribe to this information and do visualization on its side. I know that it's a bit more tricky because, yeah, there is a lot of metadata involved, but technically it's possible.
I'm just wondering if that's something that needs to be Tekton specific, or if there might be something already out there for this. Because at the end, in terms of like pipeline execution logs, it's all running in pods. So basically it's the logs sub-resource in Kubernetes. So you can already get those from the API, and that's what we do. Like in the Tekton CLI, you can stream the logs by using TKN, which is a Tekton CLI, which basically connects to the API using the watch option, and then you get the logs there. And I think that's the same that the dashboard does. and then it uses WebSocket to display those. So I wonder if there is anything that would generate like Kafka events type of stream already from pod logs, Kubernetes pod logs. And if that exists, it's something that basically would serve the purpose, if I understand correctly.
Yeah,
so maybe I need to invest.
So for us, Apache Kafka was just an experimental implementation. So yeah, I keep hinting OpenTelemetry just because we started a lot of activities consolidating on that. But yeah, for logging part, it's still in the very beginning. So let's see how it goes. For us, when we talk about pipeline information, we actually need some additional metadata because we need to build a pipeline graph. So that we can visualize steps. And the question is about the metadata that would be submitted. So pretty much like CD events project does for various events, we would need approximately the same for pipeline graph execution. So that, for example, in your pipeline, you execute a script and yeah, there is information submitted for that so that we can trace this data. And at the same time, we can visualize it as pipeline execution graph.
Yeah, yes, about that. I mean, we do have the events, and I mean, we could extend if there is an event missing, or but we do set events for like when pipelines are started or stopping, and same with tasks. We don't have events at step level today, but we could add them if needed. What I'm wondering is, I mean, those are good for like runtime execution visualization. So if you want to know within a pipeline where you are in the execution and you want to visualize that, it gives you the data. But what about the initial static view of the pipeline? So if you have a if you have the pipeline written as a Jenkins pipeline and translated into Tekton, then you can have the visualization, the usual visualization, and then you get the runtime event from Tekton that works.
Yeah, so how it happens right now, we have basically pipeline storage. It's just well, a bunch of XML files as well. So every pipeline, once it's completed, it includes a node graph, which we basically just put to the storage and then represent from there. So currently, we wouldn't query Tekton to retrieve this information graph because Jenkins persists it on its own. We could potentially do some kind of retrieval, but for me, it doesn't seem like to be the first priority. Because if you talk about Kubernetes ecosystem, I guess it would be just in a CRD which we can pull, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so for us, it's still a question of persistency, whether you want to use CRD or Tekton source, or whether we could use the current approach and dump it on the Jenkins side.
Yeah. So if you have the, as I said, I think if you have if you know about the pipeline structure on Jenkins side, you don't need to go and retrieve from Tekton for sure. And you can get runtime information. Either you could get it from events, from cloud events, from Tekton, or you could have, like you said in the beginning, you could have this Jenkins Jenkinsfile Runner type of execution in the Tekton steps that reports back into the Jenkins storage directly, I think.
So for all complex data, I would expect it to be keys, because while it's very tempting to have a kind of unified reporting for common operations. So for example, publishing unit test results. I guess for Tekton, it would be use keys without Jenkins too, to be able to visualize it somehow and maybe transfer this data in a standard form. but it goes way beyond just Jenkins or just Tekton. It's a separate complex area. But for Jenkins specifically, we could take Jenkinsfile Runner because, for example, in Jenkins, there is JUnit plugin, but JUnit plugin doesn't do JUnit tests. JUnit plugin just processes the report and just publishes the results. So we could basically have firstly a Tekton task which does all the build and tests with Maven, with whatever, and then just another task which connects to the same workspace and publishes the report. And well, basically that's it. It wouldn't be a huge performance overhead. So yeah, there is a lot of questions to Jenkinsfile Runner in this mode. But even now, it's just a few seconds to start up. So it doesn't seem like a deal breaker for creating a POC at least.
Okay. Yeah, you will need to find, I guess, some kind of convention in terms of what the Tekton run emits to let the Jenkins part know where to pick up the location of the Jenkins unit repo, for instance, right? So if on Tekton side you write this file somewhere that Jenkins can pick it up from or into a workspace, then you need the Jenkins runner to grab it from there and send it back to the main Jenkins that will do the visualization, I think. Yeah, I'm not too sure about
done just manually. So you write your Tekton pipeline, and yes, here you can include additional stuff for publishing report to Jenkins, and it's your responsibility to provide all parameters correctly. The question will be rather with credentials and access tokens, so that this Tekton's task could report back to Jenkins. It won't. So basically, even now, if you want to deploy artifacts to S3 and something like that, you write additional step after the build in Tekton. So basically, Jenkins would be the same, at least in the beginning. So there is no need in various magic mechanisms to determine how and where to publish. But yeah, then we still have a question like how we transparently pass information about connecting back to Jenkins. Because we could, for example, just create an API token for the build, put it somewhere on Kubernetes secrets, but it doesn't seem to be the best solution. Maybe there is something like just temporary token storage, secret storage in Tekton as an entity, so that basically when you trigger Tekton execution, you can just have some context, including security, and use it just for a particular build. Is there something like that in Tekton already? Because I haven't seen it.
No. I mean, we rely on secrets for credentials, either on secrets or you. I mean, you can pass. We have a concept of workspaces. It's an abstraction, and it can be bound to several things. It can be bound to something like a PVC, or it can be bound to a secret or a config map. So if you have your credential in a secret, at runtime you bind your workspace to a secret, and the credentials are taken from there. But you could also bind it to a workspace to a PVC. So if you have some kind of vault, you could then prepare a PVC that contains the files that you need from the vault, and then feed it into into your task. Basically, that's how it works. So what is the concern with the having the Jenkins credentials in a secret? Are those kind of static or are those short-lived?
So concern is about so Jenkins, at least the many use cases improve that there is a kind of airbag on the Jenkins side. It can be integrated with Kubernetes airbag or not. But when we discuss system, we assume that the resources are shared between multiple users. So for example, you have a Kubernetes cluster, but still there are builds that belong to different users, and these users are supposed to be deleted. And if we say that we push everything to Kubernetes secrets, it means that basically every pipeline execution would be able to use API with the same credentials to access back to Jenkins. So it could be used by one user to inject data, etc., in another build. So for me, when I'm thinking about credentials isolation, it's rather preventing use cases when builds can interact with each other and mistakenly or purposely submit data to wrong context. So yeah. I'm not sure whether, I guess for Tekton, it's not a big concern by default, because if you use Tekton, it means that yeah, the isolation is on the cluster level. But yeah, for Jenkins, historically, it hasn't been a case. And maybe it's something we need to rethink on the Jenkins side. But yeah, right now, if I offered whatever a Jenkins user to basically give up on the security mechanisms, it might be a kind of uphill battle for us.
Yeah.
Do the Tekton maintainers receive similar requests? So basically, having, do Tekton maintainers receive requests to have isolation within Tekton itself? I mean, yeah, I mean, so having multiple user contexts within the same Kubernetes cluster running Tekton.
Yeah, I mean, you can have
namespace.
You can have namespaces, you can have service accounts. So you can control which service account is used to execute your builds, basically. Right.
So even if I have one basically Tekton execution, every pipeline task could be executed in a separate namespace. So I don't have to run Tekton in a single namespace.
Yeah, no, the controller itself runs in one namespace, but the execution happens in whatever namespace that you decide. Usually you will have one or more other namespaces where the execution of the runs happens. And you can control which service accounts are used. So you can have, even within the same namespace, different service accounts, which might have access to different type of resources and secrets as well. So you have some degree of control there.
Yeah, actually, this degree of control is what we need, because potentially we could create a separate namespace even for any execution. It would be a massive overhead, but technically we could. So basically creating namespace, creating Kubernetes secrets for that, putting all the tokens there, and yeah, each pipeline then gets a separate sandbox.
Right, so you would consider the kind of the pipeline as a project, if you will, and then you have all the execution for that specific pipeline going into,
well, even that
into a dedicated namespace.
Even that it might be debatable on the Jenkins side, because we have build authentication, and theoretically, even within the same project, every build can be executed by different users with different permissions. So right. It might mean that if we really wanted to implement everything like it's in Jenkins, we would need to start every build in the same namespace, not every project. I think that it's maybe, well, it's rather a Jenkins feature, and I don't think that it's very needed nowadays. But at some point, it was heavily used for freestyle projects.
Right.
But yeah, for us, so in principle, yeah, we would connect to a single cluster, maybe, and just create namespaces, let's say, for projects or for folders. Because for me, the only reasonable isolation in 2021 is on the folder level for Jenkins. And for folder level, we can do it relatively easily. Yeah, Jonas commented about defined pods. So yeah, using service users would be also an option.
Okay.
So yeah, what I wanted to do by this meeting is to actually start doing some prototype, or at least write down JEP draft. JEP is Jenkins enhancement proposal, which would outline this system. As you can guess by now, I definitely didn't do much on this front. But I think that if such configuration some looks seen on the top level, I could try writing it down, and yeah, I still have a lot of gaps in terms of Tekton knowledge. So if there is a way to get some validation from the Tekton community once initial draft is ready, it would be great. And
yeah, sure. I mean, at this point, the main things I think I've got on Tekton side is the streaming of the logs and how to deal with the credential for reporting back to Jenkins. Yeah, and possibly the separation, the build separation. So those are areas where I can look into. I'm happy to validate any documents on your side.
Yeah. So yeah, Tekton itself, it seems quite handy. I mean, we don't need to do much to just get Tekton running. There is a question how it would be better to integrate templates and other reusable components, because there is a lot of correlation between Tekton templating and Jenkins Pipeline libraries. So maybe there are also opportunities to somehow converge things there, but right now it doesn't seem like immediate priority, because you just create templates in a separate repository and it's done. For both pipeline libraries and Tekton, the approach is the same.
Right. I understand that from Jenkins Pipeline syntax, you can get access to the entire plugin ecosystem, basically, right?
Yes and no. So Jenkins Pipeline, it executes in the Sandbox. So it has access to Jenkins system, but it doesn't have full access to binary APIs. There is script security engine, which can permit particular access that it's not enabled by default. But yeah, we try to restrict executions for many commands, either for native Java. So for example, file operations, we don't encourage that they happen from Java API. This just leads to different results from what users would expect. And the same for accessing plugins. So by default, we prevent access, but there is a way to access APIs if needed.
Okay.
So yeah, we invested quite a lot in this engine, because yeah, it's advantage and disadvantage of Jenkins that execution happens on the controller. And yeah, it saves a lot of time, but at the same time, it's a massive security concern if you consider Jenkins controller as a shared service, and well, Jenkins controller is a shared service by default. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that for us, yeah, for Jenkins itself, we still need to expose many APIs for web UI. So hopefully these implementations will change eventually. But good news is that some plugins are more or less independent. So for example, when I was talking about JUnit plugin, or for example, performance analysis, static analysis, all these plugins could be detached, and publishing could be done in a pipeline step or in a Tekton task. Because yeah, you can just package Jenkinsfile Runner instance with the required plugins and just in quotes stream the result back to Jenkins, and it should be okay. Have you seen Steward CI, by the way?
No.
Yeah, so Steward CI, it's well, basically it's Jenkinsfile Runner in Tekton. Yeah, it has been quite active in the last couple of years, but yeah, they don't have the visualization part, and this is a part which is particularly missing, at least from user experience. So I hope that if we could bridge this gap, we could actually build a more stable solution. Yeah, I'll share it later. It's basically prior work. If it's not a secret, how does it currently happen at IBM? Are Tekton and Jenkins clusters completely independent, or do you do some interaction between them?
No, not today.
No, so
but,
basically they just build separate projects and that's it.
Yeah, we do have internal Jenkins offering for our own development teams, right? And we have a public cloud offering, which is IBM DevOps, which uses Tekton underneath. So we have a Tekton cluster, which is multi-tenant with all the nice features and compliance built in. So it would make sense for us to, have because we have a Tekton infrastructure which is quite proven and stable and meets all the requirements, to use that as a runtime environment for other services on top.
Yeah. Well,
which we do for other things, but yeah, it would be great if we were able to align Jenkins on top of that as well, for instance.
Yeah, I guess Red Hat has similar use cases because since OpenShift moved to OpenShift pipelines, which is basically Tekton under the hood. So yeah, they had a lot of uphill battles with aligning Jenkins users. So yeah, for them, I believe it would be also interesting. I sent a message to Red Hat team, but yeah, they were unable to join today.
I know, but I know Red Hat is interested as well in this kind of work. I mean, for IBM specifically, I know we have a lot of customers that are used to Jenkins in terms of UI, but also the Jenkins syntax for writing pipelines. So what would be interesting for sure would be to have a setup where you can still write your pipelines in the Jenkins format.
But execute them on Tekton.
But execute them, yeah. And it doesn't have to be necessarily, it can be transparent to end users at the end of the day. That is, I mean, you could think to benefit from the Tekton catalog and gradually, benefit more from like the existing components there. Like today, you could call out within a Jenkins pipeline to Tekton tasks, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
But still benefit. I mean, from if you could consider the Jenkins pipeline as a kind of DSL on top of the Tekton pipeline, if you will, where the syntax is simpler than the Tekton one. Developing a Tekton task and Tekton pipeline can be a lot of YAML. So for people that wants to get started, it can be a bit daunting. While the Jenkins syntax might be easier and more, easier to deal with. And that's the feedback I've
That's a good point.
received.
But, yeah, for implementation detail, one big problem is how it's executed. Because if we say that we want to execute the entire pipeline in a single container, of course we can offload it to Tekton, but it doesn't use much advantages of Tekton. So if you want something real, we would need to somehow convert this pipeline definition to multiple Tekton tasks. And while it's possible, it might lead to additional issues. So declarative syntax would be easier for that. But yeah, I guess many people on this call don't really use declarative because, well, declarative is also a kind of simplification for Jenkins pipeline. It's basically syntax sugar, which creates all these stages tied to a single engine. And Jenkins pipeline is more flexible. So when you develop pipeline libraries, etc., you usually opt out to script the pipeline. And
okay, I see.
Yeah, and then it becomes complicated. So actually, for declarative pipeline, there was already converted in Jenkins X. So declarative pipeline to Jenkins X pipelines, and while we could and Jenkins X pipelines were basically on the top of Tekton too. But for me, the main question whether it's useful to anyone, because the most of real pipelines I see they're in script pipelines. So
I see.
It would be a solution just for a narrow range of use cases. And well, for scripted, it's really difficult to guess whether it's possible.
It might be possible still. I mean, maybe it's worth doing an analysis on that. I just shared a link to KFP Tekton, and that's a project that was driven mostly by IBM. And basically, in Kubeflow is an engine for doing that machine learning data type of pipelines. And it provides a Python DSL. And what we have, that Python DSL can compile into Argo CD pipeline, or it can compile now as well into Tekton pipelines. So there is basically, we take the DSL from the Python DSL from Kubeflow pipelines and translate it into Tekton pipelines. So the execution under the cover is then done via Tekton, and you can benefit from all the Tekton standard execution benefits. You can browse your pipeline via the dashboard, Tekton dashboard if you want to. But then, you can basically continue to write your pipeline in the same format as you would in Kubeflow pipelines, and then you can visualize them also in the Kubeflow UI because they're written in the Kubeflow DSL, so it's all done native to Kubeflow. And I was wondering whether a similar approach could work for pipeline as well. So if you were able to translate the pipeline, even the scripted format, into some kind of corresponding Tekton pipeline, then you would still maintain the visualization part, the reporting part on Jenkins. You would have the ecosystem of and all the existing pipelines written that continue to work, but you could start executing them. It might be with certain restriction initially, but it would be
there would be a lot of restriction, but technically it could be done. So for us, the main problem would be to map to tasks, because we definitely want to have multiple Tekton tasks so that we have execution in different containers while passing the workspace. And not all Jenkins pipelines are implemented in this way, though it's possible. But yeah, splitting, yeah, I think it could be done for many cases. The problem with that compiling Jenkins pipeline isn't always possible on its own because it is dynamic logic. Sometimes it loads pipeline libraries, etc., on the flight. So just doing kind of conversion for any use case is not possible. But yeah, again, it could be simplified. If all libraries are implicit, then we can do compilation once in the beginning, and we could discover a lot of calls. We can decide what and where call. Yeah.
Mm. But even in a scripted pipeline, do you have a separation between stages somehow, or how is it a pipeline?
Well, so yeah, it's optional. Let's see. So we can just open code. So when you work with scripted pipeline, basically you get just Groovy. Just a second. And what it means that yeah, here we have execution. So if you want to have a stage in the Jenkins, it's something like that, and that's it. So basically you have a stage, and there, for example, if you need a node, you say node, node, for example, Linux, and you do something there. And it's more or less common. At the same time, you don't have to do that. You can avoid using stages at all. You can somehow switch between node implicitly. So, for example, there might be pipeline library steps, something like on Linux node, and then this code is some way deep inside because in Jenkins we have a lot of extensions just by Groovy closures. So it would be like that, and it can be even more awkward because, for example, in Jenkins, from one node you can call another node. Yeah, we would need to unravel many of these edge cases if you wanted to just process the execution correctly. Again, how popular it is, yeah, I don't think that it's as popular as we would need. It would need to be for us to be concerned because many pipelines are really simple in Jenkins. So, for example, in Jenkins itself, we have pipeline library, and I believe that all pipelines we have here would be easily convertible to Tekton because, yeah, for example, there is a lot of scripting there, but ultimately we end up with parallel tasks which execute on node and pass through just several common stages like doing Maven, doing more Maven, and then just publishing the results and archiving. So these constructs could be easily converted to Tekton. The problem is how to do it automatically, because here you can see that the pattern is probably inverted compared to Tekton, because we just allocated the node, and then within the node we do multiple steps. In Tekton, we rather expect that every step will be performed in a separate container. So firstly, we would execute Maven. Then we would, let's say, archive, like upload to S3 in a new container. And then we would do all this static analysis checks and publishing also in separate containers, right? Or maybe I'm wrong.
Yes, no, you could do that. I mean,
But yeah, the default expectation that you would basically have separate containers for each task.
I mean, the advantage of having several containers or pods is, so if you have several containers within a pod, so if you would be like several steps within a task in Tekton naming, they're executed sequentially, but you only then have the pod creating the pod, that override running once. If you have multiple tasks, then you have multiple pods, so you must have the overhead of starting a pod multiple times, but then those can run in parallel. If they have no dependency between each other, they can run in parallel, right? So tasks can run in parallel. So it depends what you need. Often the reason for breaking into tasks is either that the task is a reusable block. So you want to do a specific job, and you already have a task that defines how to do that. So you just pick it from the catalog and you put it in your pipeline. So that's one benefit of using task. Yeah, and the other benefit is if you want to have parallel execution, if you have a pipeline where you do, I don't know, you do your static analysis, your coverage, your unit tests, and multiple things. You want to do them in parallel before you run some integration tests or some deployment afterwards, for instance. But yeah, that's just one example.
Indeed. So in Jenkins, it's more common to do this publishing sequentially because the syntax just suggests that. But yeah, rather than in Tekton, it could be just parallel by default, which is definitely an advantage. But yeah, if we create a compiler to Tekton pipelines, many use cases could be determined. And of course, if you use Kubernetes plugin, if you use Docker pipeline plugin and others, they're more naturally convertible to Tekton because they have more or less clear separation between stages. So you can, in Kubernetes plugin, you can also create just a pod with multiple agents for different steps and multiple containers. If Carl is still online, he can comment on that. But yeah, generally, Kubernetes plugin allows doing that. So you just provision pod and switch from container to container with the tools you needed. So it's very close to what we would do in Tekton. So you see more value in this execution. So when you have Jenkins file definition, but executed on Tekton natively, not in having Tekton format in Jenkins.
Yes. Yes, that would. I mean, it could be both of them, but since there is a lot of pipelines already written in Jenkins, and if you want to, run a Jenkins service and you don't want to go tell people, first you have to rewrite all your pipelines in Tekton format, and then you can start using this Jenkins service. I mean, or you could say, you could provide both words, and then people could move pipelines to the other formats over time and have access to different kind of benefits depending on whether they're written in Jenkins format or Tekton format. That's the other alternative.
Yeah, so for us, the main problem is finding bandwidth because there are not so many contributors right now who work in this domain. So we have did awesome work, as James Strahan, Garrett, all of them contributed to this Tekton Client Plugin. It's just a first step, but going beyond that would definitely require a lot of coordinated effort. So I'm not sure it's probably the case when we call in the company contributors and see whether we could at least crowdsource some time for one of these projects. But yeah, for that we need to think what projects would actually get support. Because,
yes.
Yeah,
so sorry.
It's me. Please go ahead.
No, I think if we can come up to a solution that works, that helps the teams in IBM or in Red Hat, it should be possible then to to get contribution to those. I don't know how much of Jenkins internals knowledge we have available, but personally, I don't have much deep understanding about the Jenkins internal. But I think if at least there is some support in driving like the design and coming to a set of features that would make sense for folks, I can definitely go back with this information and the things that we discussed today and see if it's interesting, and then we can work as a shared effort in this.
Yeah. I would be really interested in that. Though I guess we need two designs. So one design is basically the tone format in Jenkins, which is more or less straightforward. But yeah, supporting the Jenkins files, then yeah, it will be complicated, but I think that is doable. Maybe I should talk to Andrew Bayer a bit to see whether he would be interested, at least to do some, to see whether we could apply what we did for Jenkins X to such conversion. And yeah, if it's doable, why not? So there are questions about the recording. I will upload it to Jenkins YouTube by the end of the weekend. So yeah, there will be some notes. And yeah, we are not making much notes right now, but yeah, I'll spend some time to write a transcript so that we have key points noted on paper. Yeah, but I think that yeah, the main question, you're right, is just having some design so that we can see the use cases. Because I believe that Red Hat and IBM have ones. You can also talk to SAP, but they have different ones. So, let's see.
Okay. Yeah, but even for the Tekton format in Jenkins, I think the prerequisite would be to do this work in Jenkins core so that you basically separate out the pipeline engine more neatly than it is done today, right?
Yeah, it's a bit more tricky than that because pipeline engine is mostly implemented in Jenkins Pipeline plugin set. So Jenkins Pipeline has, for example, its own log storage implementation. And when we're working on a pluggable log storage, we finished on the pipeline part. So currently, for example, pipeline is more flexible and we could use extension points on that side. But many other abstraction layers are not that flexible. And indeed, so just log reporting, etc., will likely require some tweaks to make it possible. Jenkins allows modifying data upon build completion, but there is no API or CLI which would allow to do it externally. So it's usually plugins that do that. But what we would need is to have a kind of API in the build when you call Jenkins and say that, yeah, for this particular build which is pending, I want to upload this report. And please attach it to the build data. It's doable, but yeah, we don't have these APIs at the moment for many cases.
It's kind of externalize an internal interface. It's an interface that is available to plugins and make it available via the API.
Yeah.
At least it is a stable interface if it is usable to plug in. If it is available to plugins, it's an internal interface, but it should be a stable interface, I suppose.
Yeah, so it's available everywhere. At the same time, yeah, architecture of Jenkins is a bit complicated because historically many such interfaces are not even a part of the Jenkins core. So, for example, unit test reporting is a part of the JUnit plugin due to historical reasons. And yeah, there are some exceptions. So, for example, robot framework plugin for Python doesn't really integrate with this JUnit plugin. Instead of that, it implements many bits on its own. But apart from these atrocities, it should be more or less straightforward for Jenkins. You just need to know where to locate the data. And well, there are many just common use cases, so I think that we can figure it out. And for other plugins, that have complex reporting, yeah, again, it could be done gradually. Right now, I would just like to see build log, test results, static analysis, maybe coverage and performance tests. And that would be already a really great start in terms of utilizing Jenkins Web UI. But other analytics capabilities, so for example, Jenkins has embedded traceability capability, but whether it's really useful in 2021 or whether it should be just going somewhere to open telemetry and without Jenkins interface completely, yeah, I'm not too concerned about it right now.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, we have some time left. So would you like to discuss more on this topic and or maybe dive into other area?
Maybe just some, I don't know, maybe we can just mark down some clear next steps. So where do we go from here? What is the action for everyone? So I think, I think I've noted for Tekton side in general, at least, that we need to, there are a few things. Tekton, like, okay, temporary credentials, how to handle those credentials for reporting back to Jenkins, the streaming of logs, and the pipeline graph structure. So, and then again, I mean, if we were using Tekton format in Jenkins, I think that the pipeline structure is then provided by the pipeline definition, right? So we only need to provide the runtime. And if we use the Jenkins format translated, again, we would have the static definition already in the pipeline. So it's all about the runtime. Okay.
Yeah.
And yes. So the other thing that we need is people contributing to this project. But yeah.
People is always complicated.
I mean, would you be able to drive the design for the specs, the JEPs that you?
Yeah, I have all. Can definitely drive Tekton format definition. I mean, part for the Jenkins file to Tekton. I would firstly need to talk to Andrew Bayer. Most likely he won't be interested in that right now, but asking doesn't hurt. I think that, yeah, for me, this area might be just too complex in terms of pipeline conversion, because it's more, well, we can at least start exploring that and to see whether we could facilitate some feedback and use cases. But yeah, right now, so if I'm to drive it, it's definitely not November and December, or maybe a bit later. Just I'm changing jobs right now, so my bandwidth will be limited.
Yeah, makes sense.
But at least to start exploring that and document the concept without design, it's something we need. So maybe a few pages. This item I can take an action. And
and how do we track this work or sync on progress? What is the proper forum? Do you use issues on Jenkins side, or it's Jira, right?
Well, in Jenkins we largely moved to GitHub issues. So in this particular question, in this particular topic, the question is where to put it, because we have so many components. So we can probably, so organizational wise, I would rather keep it under the umbrella of Cloud Native SIG, or maybe under the umbrella of CDF interoperability SIG, whatever is more convenient. Yeah, for task tracker, yeah, I could just create a new repository for that.
Okay.
What would be your preference? We could take existing one, like let's say just SIG interoperability, and say we do it under the umbrella of the SIG as one of the options. And yeah, secondly, just new repository somewhere.
No, I mean, if it's okay for the SIG intro folks, yeah, that works for me.
Okay, I can ask. So yeah, this part I can take. Yeah, for Jenkinsfile to Tekton converter, we can definitely create a task for that. But yeah, what I think that we firstly need to write up just to document the concept and maybe a few examples. Okay. So anything else I'm missing? Or facilitate some feedback in the communities. But yeah, I think it's all for now. I'll also reach out to VipHub and to the Red Hat team to see whether they would be interested. Maybe also VirtuSlab, because they're currently building Jenkins Kubernetes separator, and obviously using Tekton they could have some advantages.
Yeah, I know Siamak from OpenShift Pipeline is interested at least.
Maybe Jenkins team would be interested as well, but yeah, Jenkins they need to regroup. But yeah, if they have some interest, because they already contributed a lot to Tekton Client Plugin, so they could be well, they need it for integration as well. So maybe they would also be interested to see where it evolves.
Yeah, I think might be good to have maybe a couple of diagrams trying to visualize the architecture for integration.
Yeah, I wanted to do it for today, but yeah, overcommitting is definitely a part of my job definition. So yeah, when it will be definitely inside the proposals.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I can try to start something if you want, but I mean, on the Jenkins side, I'm a bit on the light side in terms of knowledge of the internals.
You can start from the Tekton side, and then we can collaborate if you want.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, Feynman also have to drop.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, no worries. Yeah, I wonder whether it would be interesting to CubeSphere team, because I've heard that CubeSphere is also about integrating Tekton, but I'm not sure where it's on the roadmap these days.
Yes, yeah, we just started with the integration with Tekton, so let's.
So you started.
Okay. Yeah.
That's cool. So maybe it would be also so getting CubeSphere, Cloud participating. Okay. What about others? So we basically spent the most of the time talking with Andre. And sorry if it was difficult to follow, because yeah, I definitely didn't do my homework before this meeting. Yeah, just in case there are any comments or feedback, they will be appreciated. So I know that David develops a lot of scripted pipeline. Would be cool to know what's your vision for Tekton integration.
Who was you calling on?
You? Yeah.
I mean, we've kind of talked about in the past having better interoperability between tools. You know, I mean, that's just pure open source spirit. I personally don't run a lot on Jenkins right now, but it really just depends, because I do a lot of consulting, so I go from client to client, and you know, you never know what they're going to be running. So it's been a long time since I've looked at Kubernetes offerings. But yeah, I think I'd have to go and look at the benefits of Tekton, and then, you know, where does that fit for you, you know, as you're evaluating your options, and just having the option to have other pipeline engines is definitely something that is interesting and probably good for the community. But like you said, there will definitely be edge cases. So you'll probably pick up some benefits from using them as an engine. And then, you know, it's like, well, what do I lose when I decide to translate my existing Jenkins file into one that can run on Tekton?
Right. So yeah, I was looking into that, and for me, the first table stake feature was reporting, because from what I see, not so many people are ready to lose it. Yeah, though even with Jenkins, many integrate with external services like TestRail, etc., and it can be done with Tekton as well. But Jenkins user experience for reporting has been actually quite good. So this is a part we should try to retain.
Yeah, and I think you guys mentioned something about Tekton is usually something done in concurrently versus sequential. And that's probably definitely some place that Jenkins could use some help. They have, we have parallel stages to run things concurrently, but kind of the ability to like display that is very hard. It seems like with current pipelines, right? A lot of the output will be mashed together. So it's very hard to follow like, concurrent builds where maybe that's something that would be a benefit to having Tectonic as a build engine.
Agreed. So this is something we can look into. But yeah, currently pipeline visualization in Jenkins is also a hard topic. So Team Jacob is working on the new plugin for browsing pipelines. But yeah, currently I'm not so sure about the future of Blue Ocean or of pipeline stage view. So maybe it's a topic that needs to be brought up to the authors. Well, because yeah, I agree with you that Jenkins is not great at massive parallelization. So they could definitely improve it.
And then just pipeline thoughts in general, regardless of the executor. To me, I feel like there was, for a year or two or three, there was that kind of push towards YAML, like when Travis got popular, and then GitLab, and then GitHub Actions. But I think we're going to see that reverse. I mean, you're seeing it in JavaScript and Python, where typing and things like that are becoming extremely popular very quickly. I think you're going to see more developers wanting to build their CI/CD pipelines in some kind of feature-rich programming language, and not in Bash or some type of job DSL type language, maybe like descriptive pipeline. You're going to see people want to push towards, I think, more like full-featured programming languages.
Maybe. Well, there are two different approaches always. So some people want to see more YAML. Some people want to see full programming languages. Some people want for it to just build. No code is an option. But yeah, let's see how we can combine that.
In Tekton here, we have YAML, but we have conditionals, and we have finally statements, and we have experimental loops and recursion. Someone has, like the Kubeflow folks, implemented even recursion support.
So basically, you put more or less classic DSL into YAML form.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting to have a lot of power and information in your pipeline and metadata and structure and so forth, but then it becomes really like a development job, writing the pipeline. So like writing a Tekton task, but well written with all the input parameters and results and the things done properly, becomes a development job. Yeah, so it's that's why the catalog and the usability story is important for us, because yes, you want to write part of your pipelines, I think, in a declarative way where it's you have all the inputs and outputs clearly specified, and you can then combine them with the construct that you want, but you still want the other spectrum where you want people just to even maybe send graphically, you have a UI where they drop the boxes and say, okay, this is my pipeline, and it connects things together, and it's very easy to do. So I think there both words exist.
Yeah. So basically, Tekton cannot be longer considered as declarative definition, right? Well, it has never been declarative definition. But yeah, now it's even less.
Well, I mean, the content of the steps and the task is imperative in a way. So of course, you have some script does something, but it's declarative in the way that you can say what are your inputs, what are your outputs, and yeah, that's one thing that we are hitting in a few places now. A few use cases I've seen that is a bit of a limitation. Is we had this concept of pipeline resources in the beginning that could be used as inputs and outputs, and you could say this input is a Git repository, this output is a container image, and so forth. So it was kind of typed inputs and outputs. And we stepped back from that because it was not implemented in a way that was really good for usability, and it was not really useful. But now we are saying that there are a few use cases where, like provenance, for instance, now, where it's important to know that a certain pipeline or task produces a certain type of artifact, because maybe you want to know how you want to sign this artifact, or you want to store it permanently so that you can always access it, and these kind of things. So we're probably going to work and need to work in adding some of that extra metadata back into the pipeline definitions.
Yeah, that's cool. Maybe it will be helpful for us. And basically, we've seen the similar evolution, for example, with GitHub Actions, because GitHub Actions metadata evolved a lot. Well, originally in beta, it just wasn't required. You were able to write any step, but now if you want to put it to be on the marketplace, they require quite a lot of metadata to be available, because otherwise the tooling is unable to process it correctly. Which is okay. Yeah. So I think we have a basic plan, and yeah, yes, my homework will be to actually write up something so that it can be reviewed by people who are not Jenkins or Tekton experts, but who are actually users, so that we could understand feasibility of this approach for them. And yeah, so I'll take some action items, and yeah, hopefully I'll find time to do it soon. Yeah, and thanks to Feynman for the link to CubeSphere.
Yeah, this is a proposal of integration with Tekton. One of the contributors from our community shared this document.
Thanks for sharing. Okay. So yeah, basically as alternative engine, so more or less similar to what we want to see in Jenkins. Yeah. Okay. So maybe it's something aligned to what Andrea was mentioning. So basically, additional description syntax. No, it's not. No. So basically, this syntax is rather for CubeSphere, so that it can map to Tekton more or less easily.
I think this is still in very early stage, and going forward, maybe we are going to design a single interface, web interface for this, for their integration. Yes, it sounds like the CubeSphere DevOps with Jenkins. Yeah, you know, we have a individual web interface for Jenkins Pipeline, so which is similar to the Blue Ocean.
Yes. And yeah, so basically you consider using the same interface, right? Yeah. So basically, it's what we would like to see on the Jenkins site as well. So I mean, to a single web UI.
Yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Simplify. Yes. Yeah. Just make sure the user experience is the most simplified.
Yeah. Well, eventually you may need some specifics of pluggability, but yeah, having such a foundation, I think, would be nice for any extensible system. And yeah, I guess you're doing more or less the same as we discussed before, for example, for Jenkins X, when Jenkins X was deciding what build engine to use, they basically put multiple ones. And on the Jenkins side, we actually want even Jenkins to support multiple engines. So let's see how we could unravel this Russian doll later.
Yeah, we'll let you know if you have any progress for this integration.
Yeah, so I don't think there will be much progress in the coming couple of months, but I hope that there will be some specs available for review so that we can at least see whether it's feasible and whether there would be people who want to contribute towards this goal. Okay. So anything else we should discuss today? Probably not. Then thanks everyone. So in 20 minutes, we'll have a session with Levi about Visual Studio Code and development tools. And as we agreed, we postponed the Jenkinsfile Runner session by 1 hour. So at 1 p.m. UTC, we will have the Jenkinsfile Runner session. And yeah, then we will basically close. And yeah, I'll take action item to just process all nodes. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Oleg, for hosting such a great summit.
Well, it's just a very small summit this time. So, we could have prepared and announced it a bit earlier. So in summer we had 50 people participating. And yeah, I think we can return back to the scale for the next summit. But yeah, for this particular one, I just wanted to have several focused discussions. So hopefully we achieve these goals. And yeah, thanks a lot to Andrea for joining us. Thanks, Adana, Sleve, and Feynman. So yeah, for me, I've got a bunch of additional information. So hopefully I will find some time to get over this, to finish the design.
Okay.
Thanks, Oleg.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.